So mechanical keyboards have definitely gotten more popular over the past 10 years or so. They're really popular among gamers especially, and you might be thinking, why is that? Are they really that much better? And I think, yes, they are a lot better than regular keyboard types that we're going to talk about. And the reason they're not as popular is because a lot of people just don't even really know about mechanical keyboards, and also mechanical keyboards are significantly more expensive. So let's first get into what exactly are the differences and how much better are they. The first thing you need to understand is what a typical regular old keyboard is. Like if you just go to this store and buy the cheapest basic keyboard you could buy, it's probably going to be what is called a rubber dome keyboard, also called a membrane keyboard. And basically the structure of these types of keyboards is very simple, very cheap to produce, and it's basically just a PCB board, a circuit board, and there are disconnected circuits for each key, and then you have this rubber membrane that has these domes sticking out of it, and the keys simply line up with these domes and get pressed down, and then the domes provide a little bit of resistance at first, but then eventually they collapse when you press enough pressure, and there are these contacts on the bottom of the dome that close the circuit on the PCB board, just allow the thing to be connected, and then that sends the signal. And the reason these are so popular, again, is because they're so cheap to make. It's just a circuit board, which can just be printed on, mass-produced, and then you have like a silicone rubber mat, which can just be injection molded or whatever. That's super cheap to make. And then you have the keys that sit on top of it. Super duper simple. You just press down. There's not really much going on there. A mechanical keyboard switch, on the other hand, works on a different principle. Instead of pressing down and making contact with the board, you have these two metal contacts, and one of them is under tension, and you have this plunger which gets actually pressed down. And when you press down on the key, it moves the key out of the way, allowing one of the contacts to actually touch the other contact. So it's basically blocking it until you press down, then it moves out of the way and makes contact that way. So then why are mechanical keyboards considered better? And one of the bigger reasons is because they are a lot more comfortable to type on. This is obviously subjective, but there's also a lot of different types of mechanical keys you can get, which you might like better than other types, which we'll get into. With rubber dome keyboards, they're all gonna feel really the same. You press it down, you have to press it all the way down until your finger pretty much hits a solid surface, which is when they make contact. So if you're doing a long typing session where every single key you hit has to basically strike the key all the way down onto a hard surface, that can get a little bit fatiguing, maybe even, annoying to type on. And if it's a particularly cheaply made rubber dome keyboard, then you might have to press down harder, and then again, you're just striking your finger on this hard surface the whole time. It doesn't really feel like that, obviously, because the rubber's providing some support initially, but you are pressing all the way down. With mechanical keyboards, on the other hand, the switch is not reliant on the key being pressed all the way down and hitting the PCB board. Instead, that switch is activated whenever the key moves down enough to the point where the contact is able to move. So you don't have to press the key down all the way to the bottom for it to be activated, so they have a little bit of give to them, so they're a little bit more comfortable. And also, there's a ton of different types of mechanical keyboard switches. So one of the most popular brands is called Cherry. They make a line of switches called Cherry MX, and typically this is what you're gonna see if you just kind of search mechanical keyboard. Probably all of them are going to have Cherry MX switches in them, unless they're using like Chinese knockoffs or something, or some companies have made their own types of mechanical switches. They're really similar, but again, we'll get to that. As for Cherry though, we're gonna go over these because they're the most popular ones. They have different types of switches that are named after different colors based on different properties. So for example, they're going to vary in whether they have an audible click or not, whether they have a tactile bump when you press down or not, and also how much force is required to be applied when you press down the key. And here we can go over what are the most popular types of these keys. The first type of these are Cherry MX Blue switches, and these have both a tactile bump so you can feel when it activates. When you press down, it'll kind of give way really quickly, and also you'll hear an audible click. So they're pretty loud. They do feel pretty cool to type on, but again, if you're around people, if you're in an office, a dorm, then this is gonna be really annoying for people around you because they are very loud. And it's also a very distinct sound. If you hear someone typing on one of these keyboards, you'll know, okay, that's a mechanical keyboard, that's probably Cherry Blue switches. It's almost instantly recognizable. There's another similar one to blues, which are cherry greens, they're pretty much the same exact thing as cherry blues with the audible click and the tactile bump, except they require more force to press down on. Now, the next type of switch, which are really popular, especially for gaming keyboards, are cherry red switches. And that's actually the kind that I have right now. I used to use blue switches, but I don't know, they got kind of annoying, and I think red switches are just fine. They're fun to type on. And the properties of these is that there's no tactile bump, and also because of that, there's no click sound. And also, they require a lot less force. Well, not a lot less, but they're the lower amount of force required. Another thing to note is with the blue switches, the way the click mechanism works is it's kind of a wavy force profile. So you start pressing down, and then as you get closer to the activation point, the amount of force and resistance gets a lot higher. So you press down and then it clicks, and then there's a mechanism that kind of gets released, and then a lot less force is required. So it's like you have to press hard, then not as much. Whereas on red switches, it's pretty much linear. So the amount of force you required is very smooth, and it's not going to change depending on how far you press down. And again, you don't need to press down the switch all the way. It's like halfway, but that's just the way it feels. A similar switch to cherry reds are cherry black switches. They're pretty much the same. They have no audible click or tactile bump. They, again, just require more force than the red. And then the next major common type of switch are cherry brown switches. And these, unlike blue, do not have an audible click, but they do have a tactile bump. So you can actually feel exactly when you activate the switch. So you're pressing down, you'll feel it give way, and that's when it activated. But again, you can keep pressing it down, unlike a rubber dome. And then again, there is a kind of a cousin to the brown, which are the cherry clears, which again are the same thing. They just require more force. So clearly you have a lot of choice, unlike rubber dome, where, you know, depending on the manufacturer, depending on the quality of it, you know, there might be more or less force required. One of the advantages of going with a mechanical keyboard is you can know exactly what brand and type of switch it's using. So you can say, okay, well, I really like cherry red switches, so I'm gonna buy whatever brand I like, which is whether it's Corsair or Cherry keyboards directly or Thermaltake, whatever manufacturer, as long as they're using cherry red switches, it's going to feel the same. And then you can just get whichever keyboard you think has the best features on the side. And also more recently, Cherry has made some even other types of keyboard switches that are, I think, less common, maybe becoming more popular. One of these is silent red switches, also called pink switches. And the idea is these are the same exact thing as the cherry reds, except they're structured a little bit so they're more quiet, so they're like super silent. And cherry red switches are already the most quiet, I believe, so this is just going to be super quiet. Then they've also made so-called speed silver switches, which again are like the red switches, except they require shorter travel distance, so you don't have to press them down as far for the activation. And again, this is kind of for like gaming, so I guess the idea is if you're doing a lot of movements, then if your finger has to move not as fast, maybe it'll be faster response, but you can just decide that when you go to use it. Now, Cherry is not the only game in town when it comes to mechanical keyboard switches. Other companies have started making their own proprietary switches. Some of these are pretty similar. For example, Razer came up with their own types of switches, but they do kind of have equivalencies to different Cherry switches. For example, there's the Razer Yellow switch, which is basically the equivalent of Cherry's speed silver switches, where they don't require a lot of travel distance. There's no tactile click or anything, so that might be good for gaming. Then they also have the Razer Orange switch, which is the equivalent of the Cherry Brown switch, where there's a tactile bump, but there is no audible click. And then they also have a Razer Green switch, which is basically the equivalent of the Cherry Blue, where there is both a tactile bump and an audible click. Now, you might be wondering, are there other types of keyboard switches? And yes, there are. For example, there is a scissor type switch, which is basically like a very thin rubber dome that has these like interlocking plastic pieces. So they're similar, but thinner than rubber dome, and that allows them to be like put on laptops and stuff. And then also, for example, Apple has their own kind of proprietary version of scissor switches called their butterfly switches. Although for me personally, and a lot of people say this, they're not very comfortable to type on, again, because they don't have much travel distance at all. So basically, if you're typing a lot, it feels like you're just kind of slamming your fingers on a solid surface, even less than a rubber dome. And then there's even these new laser type switches, which instead of having a mechanical keyboard switch where the plunger blocks the metal contact from making contact with the other one, it's the same idea except with a laser or a light. So the plunger blocks a light from entering a sensor, and then when you press it down, it moves out of the way and allows the laser to pass, so then the computer knows, oh, this key switch was pressed down. And yes, I think it is a bit ridiculous to have a laser keyboard switch, and I've seen marketing that's like, a keyboard switch at the speed of light, but really, I don't think it's going to be any faster because you still have to have the light cross, and then you still have to have that diode convert it to an electrical signal, and that signal gets sent. So how is it going to be different than a straight physical electrical connection? It's not going to be any different. Though I do think the advantage of a laser switch is that you can completely separate the actuation mechanism from the activation mechanism. By that, I mean with the mechanical keyboard switch, the actual plunger touches the one contact and is held back. So when you push it down, obviously there's some extra resistance from the thing trying to get to the other contact. Whereas with a laser, obviously light is not going to be pressing on the keyboard switch at all, if that makes sense. So you might have a little bit more flexibility in the design of the thing, but at this point, I don't think it really makes a difference. All right, now at this point, you might be thinking, well, all right, so I definitely want a mechanical keyboard, but what kind of switch should I get? Really, this is going to come down to preference. I mean, if you had to go into one blind, a lot of people like the cherry red switches. I think they're fine. But really, you will want to be able to try these out ideally before you buy it. A lot of times, if you go into a store like Best Buy or whatever, they'll have these keyboards on display, or at the very least, a lot of these keyboard boxes have cutouts, so you can press on some of the keys and really just be able to feel, okay, this is what it means by no tactile bump. This is what a tactile bump does feel like, and then you can get an idea, and you really should be able to feel it before you buy it. And again, probably the most common one for gaming are some variation of the cherry reds, whether it's the cherry red with the speed keys that are less activation distance or the silent ones, whatever. Those are pretty popular, and I think they're pretty nice to type on as well. There's no like resistance or anything, so they're really easy to type on. But like I said several times before, it's gonna be down to preference. So hopefully this video at least just kind of helped you get an idea. If you didn't know anything about these different keyboard switches, you didn't know they were out there, now you'll be a little bit more informed. So anyway, if you want to keep watching some of my other videos, I'll put those right here. You can just click on those. If you want to subscribe, I try to make a couple videos a week, so it should be worth it. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys, so let me know what you think down in the comments. And again, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.